Any requests for refuah or for? Oh yes, geez, thank you, Auntie, to remind myself. It's my late grand's yahrzeit tonight. I don't know her Hebrew name, and her name was Yeti, and she was a lady, never complained. She is in a wheelchair for the last like 25 years of her life because of a stroke and had a carer. Never complained, was always besimcha. And I just want to just say something on her, in her honor. Okay. It says here, mercy emanates from the desire to take. Rav Dessler says in Michtav Me'Eliyahu, through mercy is manifested by giving to others. This is because merciful action is aroused by the will to alleviate the pain felt at the sight of another human suffering, and not from a genuine and sincere desire to give to others. The attribute of pity does not originate from the pure desire to bestow good upon another. Rather, the motivator of merciful actions is the sorrow one feels when he sees the distress of his friend. If a person sees his friend in great distress, and in his merciful response does everything in his ability to help him, his behavior would be deemed honorable. However, according to Michtav Me'Eliyahu, underlying objective is self-serenity. In contrast, if one identifies with his friend, empathizing with his friend's joys as well as his sorrows, and does whatever he can to see his friend's happiness, the behavior emanates from the desire to give. Yeah.
Okay, Okay, so just in summary of yesterday, the Gemara introduces a case that was related to the dispute between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, and I've got an unstable connection. I mean, this ESCOM can drive you to drink, honestly. Am I back on, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's clear, no problem.
Yeah, we never actually lost you. You just distorted for a few seconds.
Okay. So the Gemara introduces another case, as we said yesterday, that is related to the dispute between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. It's also a case between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, we think. So the rabbis taught in the Brisa, if one gave his agent money to buy wheat for him, and the agent bought barley with the money, or he gave him money to buy barley and he bought wheat with it. It was taught in one Brisa, if the investment depreciated, it depreciated purely for the agent. And if it appreciated purely for the agent. In other words, I'm an investor, I choose a business partner, but I don't have any time. I've got the money and I say to him, you don't have the money, and therefore I'm a venture capitalist. You go buy goods with it. These are the goods that we've agreed to, that we feel is going to have the most amount of profit. Go buy that and sell it and take the money and make us both money. So if we agreed on certain products and the person that I had as my partner or my agent representing me went and bought his own products, if he lost money, I don't lose money. He has to pay me back either way, because at the end of the day, he's got no right to deviate from our arrangement. But according to the first Brisa, is that the minute he deviates, we're no longer business partners. So therefore, any appreciation that he gets, if I told him to buy livestock and he buys half our equipment and he sells it and he loses money, it's his problem. If he makes money, it's his benefit. Because at the end of the day, the relationship was severed because he never followed my instructions as a partner based on our mutual agreement. So therefore, the relationship is severed. Why? Because, however, you've got to bear in mind that I don't take a loss. He has to return the cash which he took to buy the products, and I'm not out of pocket at all. So that's the first Brisa. The second Brisa, if the investment depreciated, it depreciated purely for the agent. And if it appreciated, in other words, went up in value, it was appreciated for the partnership. So how is that possible? Because according to the second opinion, is that basically I go in partnership with you so that we can both make money. If that goal is achieved, I really couldn't give a hoot what product you bought. Goal achieved. If you deviate from our agreed product list that you're going to buy, well, then if you lose money and I don't agree with what you bought because it was never the realm of our discussion, it's no consensus, well, then it's your loss. But if it's a gain, there's no reason why I should be penalized because you deviate. So how's the contradiction resolved? According to Rav Yochanan, he puts forward two opinions. He said the first brisa, which rules that any profit accrued goes purely to the agent, reflects the opinion of Rabbi Meir, whereas the second brisa rules that the profit accrued goes to both partners, reflects the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. So Rav Yochanan explains that the first brisa reflects the opinion of Rabbi Meir, who says that a deviation affects acquisition for the basically for the agent. The reason being is that to a certain extent he is a robber. In other words, you gave him the money in trust and he did his own thing with it. And therefore any physical change to the original arrangement means that it belongs in the possession of the robber. And he has to just pay you the cash equivalent. Whereas the second brisa reflects the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, who says that a deviation does not affect acquisition. Why? Because he basically says that if we went back to the brisa of the dying of the will, is that if you deviate from an arrangement, it doesn't break the arrangements. It just means that basically he gets the expenses or the improvement, whichever is the lower amount. But he doesn't get to keep the will and refund the original owner of the will the cash value. What happens then is all that happens is that the original owner keeps the will dyed the wrong color, but he pays for it whatever is the minimum, either the expenses or the investment, but not the person's full fee. Now, it's interesting because I thought about this. Sometimes I would think Rabbi Yehuda is a bit easier because with respect, if I want a jacket dyed black and you dye pink, I don't care if I have to pay minimum value. I don't want a pink jacket. I don't want it. So I don't know what the issue is there. I don't know if you could turn around and say you deviated to such an extent. I just want my cash back. Would assume that even Rav Yochanan doesn't argue, Rabbi Yehuda doesn't argue with that. But in any event, the reason why Rabbi Yehuda says that a deviation does not affect acquisition for the agent is because at the end of the day, the mindset of this person was to make a profit. He's not involved in taking any losses because he didn't sanction the wrong product. But if there's a profit, that was the arrangement fulfilled. So Rav Elazar objected to this, if you remember yesterday. He said, how do you even know Rabbi Yehuda is involved in our case? Maybe it could be the difference of opinion with Rabbi Meir, that in the first brisa's case where we've instructed somebody to create a dining room suite for your house, and he ended up making a chest of drawers. And then you're not going to accept anything. So whatever the agent does, it's his problem. Let's give you back the cash for the wood and the tools and whatever you spent in terms of raw materials. But the second case is a commercial endeavor, which means Rabbi Meir does not say that it affects acquisition for the robber. In other words, for a very, very simple reason, is that even Rabbi Meir would agree in that particular case that the whole goal of the partnership was to make money. So if the agent makes money, the partner's entitled to a share because he doesn't really care what you buy, he just wants the money. But if the partner and the agent agreed to buy certain products and the agent went off and bought his own products and those products lost money, that wasn't the arrangement, so he's involved in the losses only. Now, so then how... So that's the bottom line, is this is different between personal use and commercial use. But there was an issue. Why? Because in the West, where, in other words, Eretz Israel, they didn't agree with Rav Yochanan, who said the first opinion of the brisa was Rabbi Meir, the second opinion was Rabbi Yehuda. Why? Because the sages of Eretz Israel said, look, how can the investor possibly acquire a share of the produce when the agent deviates from his instructions? Why? Who notified the owner of the wheat, in other words, the seller, that he should transfer part of the wheat to the owner of the money, the investor, and not all of it to the agent? So all it was trying to say is that the one selling wheat to the agent doesn't necessarily know that the agent is acting on behalf of the investor. So when he receives the money from the agent, his intent is to transfer ownership of all the wheat to the agent himself and nobody else. And since the seller's intent, according to the sages of Eretz Israel, is integral to the transaction, how does the investor ever acquire a share of the wheat? Now, according to Rabbi Elazar, there's no difficulty with the second brisa, because according to Rabbi Meir, is that even when the agent disregards his instructions, he isn't deviating from the investor's will. Why? Because the investor only cares that at the end of the day, he makes money. But if he deviates from a private individual who wanted furniture made and it doesn't resemble anything at what the original owner required for his home, that deviation does make a difference, because the goal isn't about the money. The goal then is about having the rights for the furniture as intended. So therefore there's no issue as far as that's concerned. But so what it's trying to say here is that basically the person that owns the wheat that's selling to the agent, he has to know there's another party involved. In other words, there's a consciousness of it in order for the acquisition to take place for the partner. But there's certain people that don't agree with the rabbis of Eretz Israel. One of them is Rav Shubar Sasrati. He said, listen, it doesn't make sense, because if you're going to say that the investor can't acquire anything unless the seller is aware that the purchase is made on his behalf, then even when the investor sent the agent to buy wheat and he bought wheat as instructed, the investor should also not acquire a share of it, because who notified the seller as to the transfer of the part of the wheat to the investor? So what Rav Sasrati is saying is as follows. Gavin and I are business partners. I invest the money and Gavin buys the product. Now, Kevin's got a store and Arthur's got a store. So Gavin buys some of the product from Kevin and some of the product from Arthur. And because they both don't know I'm involved, according to the rabbis of Eretz Israel, it doesn't entitle me to a share, because the seller has to be conscious of both parties as involved. But Rabbi Shmuel Bar Sasrati is saying, listen, I don't know what you're talking about. When do you ever have a case where you go to the store and somebody's got a construction project together, but they're a whole lot of silent investors and they're doing low-cost housing in Alexandra Township and they're calling it Santon View? You know the story. So what happens then is that Kevin's got Germiston Builders and Arthur's got Olifantsfontein Hardware. So Gavin buys both of them, but they don't know I'm involved. And Rav Sasrasi says, what's the difference? Either way, whether Gavin listened to me as a partner with the right product or not, what's the difference? They just want to sell their product. As far as he's concerned, it doesn't make any difference if they know if there's an investor or not. A person wants to sell. So the Gemara says it does make a difference. According to Rav Abahu, if it's a case of wheat and wheat, it's different, because the agent is carrying out the agency as instructed. But if it's wheat and barley, it's considered like as if he deviated from the contract. So in other words, what we're saying is that if Gavin and I are in agreement of what's bought, it's not necessary that the sellers have any awareness that there's an investor. But if I asked Gavin to buy something on my behalf, and you guys weren't aware that it was the wrong thing, then at the end of the day, Gavin is not acting as my agent. Now, the term here that they call agent is actually a business partner. But what it means is is complicit in terms of the game plan to go forward in the business. So all we're saying is that if Gavin ignores my instructions, at that point it's a problem, because he's no longer, according to my will, my agent, because I would never ask him to buy something that we never approved of together. And therefore, he's using my money in a term of robbery, and it shouldn't have been sold to him. So on a practical level, guys, I don't actually understand, to me, that why that makes sense, that the person selling an item would really care who the partners were as long as they got paid. By the way, I don't get it. Unless you guys have got a brilliant understanding. But I'll give you Rabbi Abihu's contention here, as far as the fact that when somebody deviates from instructions, that person is no longer like their agent, and therefore, in order for there to be authenticity in terms of representation, instructions have to be followed. So it says now that this is true because we learned in a Mishnah in Arachin 24a, and whether one consecrates all his property to the holy temple, one makes a vow to donate his erech to the temple. The temple treasurer does not have the right in the clothing of the vower's wife, nor in the clothing of his children, nor in any colored garments that the vower arranged to have dyed for the sake of his wife or children, nor in any new shoes that the purchase was made for their sake. And the reason the temple treasurer cannot take these items is presumably because they are not the vower's property but belong to the wife and children. Okay, so I just want to explain to you what we mean here, is that a person's erech is a specific value that the Torah attaches to him. And it's based on two factors, generally age and gender. Guys, this value is unrelated to a person's market value on the slave trade. Okay, it's completely different. It's some halachic assessment based on age and gender. So if the Torah has decreed that the erech value of every male between the ages of 5 and 20, for example, is 20 shekels, and the erech value of every female in that age group is 10 shekels, if a person vows to donate his or another person's erech to the temple, he pays the amount that the Torah specified for him or that individual, whatever the Torah deems it's worth, and it's in Vayikra chapter 27, verse 1 to 8. So it's assuming that the clothing of a person's wife and children belong to them and not to him. In other words, even if he legally owns their clothing, he wants to remain married and have his children speak to him. So therefore, he's got no power to consecrate them, and the temple treasurer can't confiscate them as security for his erech vow. Now, we are saying something else as well. So the other aspect we're saying is, okay, that's for goods that have already belong in their house. You know, a husband, it might be under his name, but it is his wife's and children. So what about goods that have not been transferred to their property or their abode then? So we say, listen, say you've got a husband, okay, and he wants to have clothing made for his family members. So you didn't go to Woolworths in those days. You had to get a tailor, or you had to have somebody to dye the fabric. So he makes a transaction with the dyer, and he pays for it from his own money, okay? So even if the dyer intends to transfer the garment to the one making the transaction, or the owner of the money, his intent is for the husband, because the only one he saw in the shop was the husband. But the problem is, according to Rav Shmuel Bar Sasrati, he argued that the only one for whom the seller intends can possibly acquire the item, then basically the clothing should be acquired by the husband rather than the wife or children who bought them. So the temple treasurer should be able to confiscate. Because why? According to Rav Shmuel Bar Sasrati, why are newly dyed clothes considered the property of the wife or children? So let's say here, who notified the dyer to transfer his colored clothing to the wife or children? So he's actually being sarcastic. He's actually saying, yeah, of course it belongs to the husband. So it's saying, obviously, it's the reason the wife and the children acquire the garment is because we say that the husband is actually making a purchase for them, is carrying out his agency, and is considered to be an extension of his wife or children. So it obviously follows in our case that when the agent follows the instructions, he's carrying out the agency of his business partner, the investor. And it's the same if he carries out the instructions of the homeowner to buy wood to do the dining room table. So in the case of wheat and wheat, in other words, when there is no deviation from instructions, the agent acted as instructed. The reason the investor acquires a portion of the wheat is because the agent that does is acting as the investor's legal representative. And he still can, because he hasn't deviated from instructions. So even if it's transferred to him personally, he's still acting as an agent on behalf of the investor because he hadn't deviated. So that supports the view of Rabbi Bayu in the Sages of the West. According to Rav Sasrati, doesn't make a difference, because whoever's selling it to you doesn't care, basically. He'll sell it to you. The fact of it is you want Shalom Bayit and you want your kids and your wife to speak to you. So you're going to make sure they get it. But it doesn't mean it doesn't financially belong to the husband. So Rabbi Abba said, no, actually the husband himself owns the garments that he had made for his wife and children. But the reason why the temple treasurer has no rights in this sort of clothing is because whoever consecrates all his property doesn't have the kavona, the intention, to consecrate the clothing of his wife and children. In other words, the husband is legally empowered to consecrate the clothes. Why? Because they're his asset. But the reason they don't become temple property is, in his mind, he obviously wasn't going to leave his wife and children without clothes. So his intent was so obvious that it qualifies the consecration, even without being explicitly expressed. Okay? And we're saying this is not only the clothes that he's given them, it's clothes that he's yet to give. Because unless you're dealing with a woke new generation, men generally didn't wear dresses. So it was obvious. Now I'm not so sure. So Rabbi Zera objected to this. Why? He said, look, does a person who consecrates all his possessions intend to consecrate his tefillin? No, obviously not. Why? Because tefillin cost a bomb of money. But we learn in the Mishnah, in Arachin 23b, that if he consecrates all his possessions, we assess his tefillin. In other words, if you consecrate all the possessions to the temple, it's including your tefillin. So we assess the value, and the vow and the borrower must redeem it. Okay. So why is it the tefillin used? Because of the price, it's far less likely that he'll donate that to the temple as part of his erech vow than new clothing. Because you buy a car once every 10 years and tefillin once every 15 or 20 years. So it costs a lot of money. So it's obviously self-evident that he means to exclude clothing that he purchased for his wife and children. So even though that's the case, if you're saying that with your tefillin, they automatically get taken as part of consideration, unless you stipulate to the contrary. In other words, if you make a general consecration, it's included, then why shouldn't we include his other assets like his wife and children's clothing? So Abaye said to Rav Zera, indeed, the person who consecrates all his possessions does intend to consecrate his tefillin. For one who consecrates his possessions thinks I'm doing a mitzvah. And obviously in that case, he wants to put his tefillin in the consecration. But a person who consecrates all his possessions doesn't intend to consecrate the clothing of his wife and his children because of the ill will that this would generate. So obviously, if it's his item, even an expensive car, unless he explicitly states otherwise, he gives it. But if it belongs to his wife or children, there's no ways he could give it without their permission, even if he financially owns it, because it's going to create absolute drama. So there's another problem. Rabbi Abaye explains an earlier Mishnah. Rav Oshaya objected to this, because they taught here in the cited Mishnah the law of one who is obligated to pay an erech vow. And we learned in the Mishnah, we, meaning the temple treasurer, exact security from those obligated in erech vows. So what it's basically saying is, one who makes an erech vow doesn't consecrate any specific item, but rather, guys, he becomes liable to pay his erech value to the temple treasury. And once that liability goes into effect, the treasurer can sue to satisfy through any means. Even if the vow had explicitly stipulated that no security be taken from him, the stipulation would be void because the temple treasury has a personal claim against him, and that claim can be enforced through every possible means. So, in other words, they can debt collect. Okay, that's the issue. So it says, does a person who makes this vow intend that security be taken from him? Obviously not. That's the objection. But the problem is, once he made the vow and became obligated to pay the treasury, his intent at that point is irrelevant. Why? Because all of a sudden, let me give you an example. You've got the Rambam Trust, okay? And you sign security for somebody. Now, you don't think that person's going to default on a loan. Kev? So, in other words, somebody needs 30,000 Rand. You one of the co-signatories, let's say 90,000 Rand. You're one of the co-signatories. And you figure, okay, you want to help this guy out. It's you and two other people. Okay, to get 90,000 Rand. Then all of a sudden, what happens is this person, COVID hits, they lose their business. They had intention of paying it back. It just didn't work that way. Now, all of a sudden, the two other candidates that also co-signed, the one into financial sequestration, and the other one ducked off to, and they can't find him. And this person that owes the money says, listen, I still can't pay. But it's COVID, there's nothing I can do. Lost the business, lost assets, everything else. Now, what happens is they come to that person that was part of the 30 grand out of the 1 and 3, and he's the only one left with the business and assets. It doesn't matter if he tended or not to basically be a co-signatory in order to secure the loan. He's finding himself sued to be jointly and severably liable for the payment of 90,000. So at a certain point, it doesn't matter what your intention is. If you sign a legal document, that's it. Okay? So,
Damon, it's like I had to get my brother and my nephew and my sister-in-law to sign 25,000 surety for the place. I guarantor. Same thing. If I abscond or whatever, I'll sign a legal document.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. Now, so guys, it obviously follows that his intent is irrelevant. Well, at the point of signing, as Arthur said, is in. Even if he doesn't want security to be taken from him. But it follows that if a man actually owns the clothing that he dyed for his wife and children, then in the case where he made an Erech vow, the treasurer would be certainly able to collect it, even if we accept the argument that he wanted to exclude it. So we want to know, if that's the obvious point, why does the Mishnah rule that the treasurer has no right in this clothing? So Rav Abba has to concede the point, and he offers another explanation in the Mishnah. So what does he say? Whoever consecrates his possessions is treated as they transferred the new clothing of his wife and his children to them beforehand. Okay. And why does he do that? Because when the husband pays for the clothing for his wife and children at the shop, he actually acquires it himself, because the shop owner is handing him the goods in return for the credit card. So even though the husband wishes to act as an agent for the wife, children, it's he, not they, that acquires it financially, according to Rav Shmuel Bas Hasrati. But it's presumed, obviously, guys, if he's buying dresses, that the minute he acquires it in accordance, what's he going to do? He's going to obviously transfer it to his wife and children because he wants them to own it. So that transfer legally takes place in concept before he consecrates his possessions to the temple treasury. So please, guys, you need to know that generally one can't transfer ownership of an item to another unless the recipient or his agent does a kinyan, an acquisitionary act. So in other words, just to have that thought process to intend to transfer the item doesn't affect its legal transfer. Our case is different, because the reason he can give it to his wife and children is because without a formal kinyan, they're not business partners, okay? Because the sincerity of his act is very, very clear. He's a husband and a father. And therefore, according to the Gemara, it resolves fully that he's got a special right to legally transfer, even without the act of a kinyan in this case. So I just want to tell you in summary what we've got. We've got 6 minutes. Okay. So this is how to summarize. So Rabbi Bayu was trying to prove from the Mishnah that when a legal agent, in this case the husband, makes an acquisition on behalf of another person, in this case his wife, that person acquires the item even though the seller intends to transfer it to the husband, because the husband bought it. So you go to Pick and Pay clothing, or you go to Mr. Price, take your credit card, they'll give it to whoever pays the credit card. So it doesn't matter, his intent is clear. Rav Abba, however, explained that the person making the transaction, the husband, actually acquired it legally, because when the buyer is another person's legal representative, the transaction takes effect in accordance with the seller's specific intent. So the seller, the cashier, intends to give it to the husband. So that's why the Mishnah rules that clothing excluded from consecration, upon acquiring it, resolves to transfer to the wife or children. So Rav Bayu agreed with the sages of the West that if you're not another's legal representative, and you act with that, you've got a problem. Because in other words, if you deviated from the instruction, then in that particular case, you've got no permission for agency, okay? Because the seller always intends to transfer title to the one who he perceives as the buyer. And only that person can technically acquire it. So the thing of it is, this is a case, according to Rav Abaya, that a person has to follow instructions, otherwise you cease to be the agent, and then there's a problem. But Rav Abaya does agree with the view of Rav Yochanan and Rav Shmuel Bar Sasrati, that basically the seller's intent governs the transaction, even when the buyer is another person's legal representative. But where there's a case where you're making a transaction with somebody else's funds, the seller actually intends to transfer title not only to the buyer, but also the one providing the money. So even if the buyer is not the investor's legal representative, in other words, he has deviated from his instructions, he's able to effect acquisition for the investor, according to the view of Rav Yochanan. Okay? So that's about the long and the short of it. All right, guys. Yeah.
Damon, just going back. So I'm just a bit. Of the owner of an item that he's looking after or been given in instruction to do something with. Otherwise, saying he can lose. He ceases to be the agent because he didn't follow. He's not following instructions. He's not following the mandate of the owner.
Damon's back.
You froze for okay, no problem. So, were you saying earlier? I may have missed something there. So, an agent, as long as he sells profit, even though it may have been against the original wishes of the owner, as long as there's a profit, that's fine. As long as the loss is made and he takes the loss, and then even if he made a profit, can he still remain agent even though he went against the mandate of the owner?
Okay, so the thing of it is, according to Rav Yochanan, the opinion with Rabbi Yehuda is he still has to partner in the profits, but he takes the losses because he deviated. According to Rabbi Meir, the partnership is severed the minute he deviated, okay? And therefore he accepts the losses and the gains because the partnership is severed. As far as Rav Elazar is concerned, in the first case, if you deviated and somebody did something for your home, the arrangement, you have to pay back the homeowner the deposit for the home improvement because you didn't follow it. But if it's for a commercial basis, even Rabbi Meir would agree that there's no problem, that the partner gets a share in profits because his intent was to make money, but he's not entitled to take a share in losses or depreciation because the agent differed from instruction. So that's it in one sentence.
Well, thank you. Yeah, once the that's why as you explained it, that's how understood.
This
whole
hopefully issue
we all understood.
Sasrati is what are you talking about a seller's intent? It doesn't make any difference because at the end of the day, you're going to hand over goods to whoever paid you the money. So what are you talking about? Rava Bayu says, no, the intent makes a difference because if the agent doesn't follow instructions, he can't act as an agency on behalf of the investor. Therefore, the investor can't get his share. He gets refunded, but he doesn't get his share of the profits. So that's that in one other sentence. We're done.
Yeah.
Good. So, sorry, guys. I thought I'd just give you a one answer sentence, but that's the concept.
You made it to the less than a minute left on the clock.
Thanks, guys.
Sure.
Gavin, you look tired.
Yeah, I know. Okay, I'm also tired.